Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone. Before we begin today, I wanted to have a brief announcement that tomorrow in DCO Commons, Balgina Mort will be reading a poet, Belarusian poet, so I encourage anyone who's here to also attend that event tomorrow evening at 5, I believe. So, welcome everyone, welcome again. Before we begin, I'd like to hold a brief moment of silence and meditation for our Caribbean brothers and sisters in Jamaica who recently endured Hurricane Melissa's presence. At the Tate Britain Museum in London, there sits a painting recently attributed to Emma Sawyer, titled Two Children with a Book. Its date can be traced back to 1831, and though it spent much of its time in obscurity due to not having any identifiable traces of a painter's signature, its recent attribution speaks to the archival efforts to preserve the rare instances of Black sitters of the time. The online caption found in the Tate's website reads, quote, "Two young Black girls sit together with a Bible in their hands, and surrounding palm trees suggest they are in the Caribbean." This is a rare example of a 19th century European portrait of Black sitters. The date of the painting coincided with the increased campaigning of Black Caribbean clergymen for an end to slavery in the British Empire. The girls' smart dress and Bible reflect their self-sufficiency and the literacy in Caribbean religious communities. These factors were used to encourage the emancipation of enslaved people in the Caribbean, end quote. The Caribbean is arguably the nexus of modernity. I often think of the quote by the poet Shivani Ramlochanat, also a Trinidadian poet. She states, "Reading the Caribbean means reading the world." A region sensitive to the cadence of nature, sensitive to the ruse of certainty and the specter of history. Throughout the history of Western art, we see soft semblances of presence of the other, the subaltern, the subjects of colonial violence and hegemony. Not just Sawyer's painting reflects this. Sir Joshua Reynolds' own portrait of Omai suggests the same attempts at portraying members of these communities with social status. It is no surprise that visual art and paintings run through the currents of the Caribbean region. Walcott found productivity and purpose in his watercolors. How he depicted not only the Caribbean land and seascapes with his poetry and plays, but the manner in which he refracted the citizens of his St. Lucia with vibrancy and color, rather than portraying us as submissive and meek in the eyes of any particular colonial gaze. Hosein's writing pulls from the long lineage of prominent Trinidadian writers and thinkers, such as Earl Lovelace, Sam Selvin, M. Nervissa Phillip, Elizabeth Nunes. I could go on and on. I won't dwell on Naipaul, since he was such an ass of a person, widely known. But I wonder, Kevin, what exactly is in the water in Trinidad that has produced so many important writers in arts and letters? Hungry Ghosts has been described as electrifying, profound, impressive, and many other superlatives that do not do the novel justice. To read Hosein's work is to step into a world of possibility and uncertainty, a space that is both damning and enlightening, where the people of a changing Trinidad survive and live in communities regardless of their difficult reality imposed by an other. Because Hosein's work, like many more contemporary Caribbean writers, centers the Caribbean and its inhabitants. It resists the temptations of imposing the foreign presence of a colonizer. Like Sawyer's painting, Hosein's own words populate our imaginations with a lingering effect. The gestures of those two sitters, one holding a Bible while the other stares at the artist, allow for us to see humanity unmasked. But unlike Sawyer, Hosein depicts all aspects of life through his main players with determined agency. Beyond survival or even assimilation, As we see with the tragic figures of Hans and his son Krishna in the novel, these characters move past the stasis of a singular moment. I'd like to think that Sawyer's two black girls are meek and incomplete reflections of their present time. Within their eyes exists a complexity and nuance of the human condition filled with desires, ambitions, rage, and anger. A spectrum of possibilities that doesn't deny their complete humanity. Hosein's work is a marvel, and Hungry Ghost, his newest novel, a worthy contribution to the pantheon of great epics. A story about family, class, and fate. Kevin Jared Hosein lifts the veil of our predetermination, an unmasking, if you will, like that of Dorian Gray, revealing to us what's hidden beneath. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Kevin Jared Hosein.
Thank you, Xavier, and thank you all for coming out today. A pleasant good evening to everybody. So I've come from Trinidad. I've braved your government shutdown to be here. And I'm very pleased to be here. It's my honor. Thank you very much. I want to paraphrase a poem for you all, so please forgive me if I stutter a bit. I must be given words so that the bees in my blood's buzzing brain of memory can be given flowers, can make flowers, can make flocks of birds, can make sky, can make heaven, and the heaven opens to the thunderstone and the unfolding land and the volcano. It is not enough to be pause, to be beat, to be whole, to be void, to be silent, to be semicolon, to be semi-colony. Fling me the stone that will confound the void. Find me the words and I will raise the colony. Find me the words and I will blind your God. And that's from a Barbadian poet who passed away a few years ago named Kamal Raffet. And that's the end of his epic poem, Negus, and it shows the power, the transformative nature and power of language. Because when I grew up, we had a very complicated relationship with language growing up. Because we speak in a Creole dialect, Trinidadian Creole English. And we've been taught, since we were little, we taught that the Queen's English, which I guess is called the King's English, was superior, and that is what you should speak, even though none of the adults used to speak it, but they always passed on this notion that the kids should do better and should, be proper and so on. And I wanted to, when I started writing, I actually started writing in foreign lands because I did not want to write about my home country. Yeah, so I actually wrote a lot about the American Midwest, like stories set there in California, Canada, a British Hamlet, even though I'd been to none of those places, and somehow in my mind that felt more fit for fiction than the island that I grew up in. So that was a battle I had growing up. And when I was writing Hungry Ghosts, I wanted this to be testament to the island, to the people, and to that struggle that we had with language. And there's a lot to do with not just the plot, the characters and the team, but with the language in here, where, like, I've refused to italicize certain foods that we have that we might view as exotic or foreign. I think those words belong with any other words that we find. And I always make the point that the Russian will not italicize borscht. The Japanese will not italicize sashimi. We should not feel forced to italicize like Bible choker or Diaz or Tawa or anything like that. There should be words among all words, that will make these images in mind. And that's always been my big push with Caribbean literature. Now, with Hungry Ghosts, it's filled with a lot of pain, but I had to approach this pain from an empathetic point of view. Even though I haven't directly felt the pain, but I felt it passed on through ancestors, because a lot of these characters would have been related to my ancestors or would have been within the vicinity of them. And there's a quote at the beginning of the novel that says, and I discussed this earlier today, "Without doubt, all kings, O son, must once behold hell. All kings, O son, must once behold hell." And that's a quote from the Mahabharata, a Hindu folk book. And just to preface the reading that I have here today, that quote does not mean that one must go through hell in order to know what hell is. The story behind that is that there was a prince, Prince Yudhishthira, and one day his brothers disappeared. And the Lord of Dharma said to him, "Your brothers have all been sent to hell." And he was like, "I need to find my brothers." So they opened the gate to hell, and he went in to look for his brothers. And he sought for many years and he could not find them, until one day he was told that, "No, your brothers weren't here, your brothers were actually in heaven. The Lord of Dharma tricked you." And then when he went back to speak to the Lord of Dharma, he said, "Why did you lie to me? My brothers weren't in hell at all." And he said, "This is so you could be king, so you could see what hell is. You could see what people go through, because you've been a prince, you've lived a privileged and coddled life, but now you've seen what people have gone through. You yourself did not have to experience it, but you could look and now see it. When you become king, you could see it in your subjects." And that's the approach I had with this book. That when I wrote it, it's not just for me. I wanted to invite readers with this opening epigraph here from the Mahabharata, that is a divine, it's not a warning, but it's a divine call for empathy that I think everyone could follow. Politicians should follow it, but I think everyone could follow. That we should be able to at least recognize what each other is going through, and that's how we're going to ascend to something greater. The passage I'm about to read is actually a bit into the book, and the name of it is "A Father's Sins." And it's the book is structured into 5, I would say, acts, and each act opens with a flashback, almost like a cold open, that shows the backstory of maybe not directly a certain character, but that character maybe have a supporting role within one of those flashbacks. But it gives it weight and gravity, give that character weight and gravity that you may not have seen in them before. And those characters would have been Rudra and Rustam, who were 2 twins who were often seen as their twin children. They were often seen as brothers. They were seen as outcasts in the village. But we don't know why exactly people were treating them that way. So the name of this chapter is "A Father's Sins." The man was lost for a long time. He was the 10th child of 11. There was nothing special about him, nothing that made him stand out, nor that drew the attention of others. Animals never paid him any mind. People never remembered his name. His parents forgot to feed him. He never celebrated a birthday, never received any presents. When he bled, nobody saw. When he bawled, nobody heard. Nobody tended to him when he was sick. Nobody knew when he was fed up, and nobody cared when he left. He moved to the capital's port and found a job there. He never considered himself a stevedore, longshoreman, nothing like that. He hadn't given consideration to a title of any kind. He had been scheduled to be aboard the ship that fated day, but a co-worker had taken ill. That day, the ship had been attacked by pirates in the Gulf of Paria. Hungry men who smelled of salt, they took everything that had been on board: flue-cured tobacco from Amarillo, casks of Campampeiro Blanco, Winchester shotguns, boxes of AA shells. Even the engine was gone by the end of the day. Everything disassembled and splayed, all for resale. They tied up the crew, and when the skipper cursed, they cut his Achilles heel and threw him overboard. They had brought the disembodied leg of some large animal with them, tossed it in right after hitting the skipper on the head. It wasn't long until the reef sharks came. They pulled the skipper under, all his dreams under, everything he would ever be under, every memory, the first woman he ever made love to, the first glimpse of his daughter, the schoolyard brawls he won, under. And after the skipper went over, the man who was lost helped the pirates throw the rest of his mates overboard, as calmly as they were jetsam and derelict. Men he had worked with for months, men with wives and children, it didn't matter anymore. He tossed in the animal parts of them and watched them all be pulled under. It was a decision the man had made in only seconds. Any later, and he would have been pulled under with them. He chose well, but the important thing he realized was that he chose his fate before somebody else could, and what was lost had finally been found. Through this act, he had convinced the pirates to take him along. They prowled near the southwestern coast, always on the lookout for cargo ships, especially the ones that drifted right into the serpent's mouth. People paid passage to be taken from Cedros to the Delta Macuro, but most ended up with the sharks. When they came across a Venezuelan cargo ship, they launched themselves aboard and put pistols to the crew's heads and told them to jump into the sea. And so they did. They took the cargo, took the fish, took the contraband, they smuggled the smugglers. Sometimes they took the women too. The man kept one for himself for his birthday, and he gave her a name and insisted she respond to it from then on. He forbade the woman from speaking, even to the two sons she bore for him, one 11 minutes older than the other. The man named them Roger and Rustam. He made sure the woman's maternal instinct remained intact. After plunging into such ugliness, she thought she'd lost the ability to remain compassionate. She surprised herself when she found room for it still. She regularly bathed and fed the boys, and though she and her sons had never spoken, she always cared for them with a gentleness that reminded her that she was human. It wasn't long until the man was put in charge of the raids. He was warned about stealing from certain ships carrying wood. In those wooden planks were the vices of the world, he was told. And the pirates warned him, those are owned by the untouchable man by the name of Chango. He ain't dangerous, but he know people who is. And he might send them people to meet you one day. The man knew who Chango was, knew where he lived, and once he could track his enemies' movements, he believed there was no reason to be afraid. And so the man taunted fate and knew that he was halfway relying on luck. And one day he knew that luck would be sent. When the day finally would come, he would kill his family before his enemies could. He would do that before fleeing the country and starting over. He told himself that no matter what, this was what he would do. He told them that this was the road and he was going to follow it to the end. That plan went awry when his wife tried to run away. She dreamt of herself back in Carapano, a land bathed in golden twilight, dances in the street, pillars of grey wood smoke in the distance, women singing, and her in the middle trying her best to release her voice, but nothing would come out. A phantom in the distance called for her, told her that she could find her voice at the seashore, and so she went in the dream, and kept walking until she came to the rocks. The shore rocks were as jagged and hot as a scarred malpais. Then the ground opened up and she fell into the blackness. She found her voice in there and woke up screaming. The man handcuffed her to the bed, had her there for 3 weeks. A rag was used to gag her mouth. He kept her naked so she could urinate and defecate easily into the fly-haloed pale position next to her. When he let his son see her, she cried and begged. But they could never understand their mother's speech. The few words of English she spoke could not come together, for the man had convinced her that the word for help was cluck. And so she clucked for her sons when he brought them to see her. He told them that this would happen to them if they were to ever try to upend what is supposed to be. Wives must stay with their husbands. Sons must love their fathers. Anything else is an affront to nature. He twisted the necks of 2 hens and told his sons to laugh at the headless birds, scampering in circles near the rushes. And the sons were 10 years old then, similar in many ways. And still to the father there was the quiet one, Rudra, and the loud one, Rustam. Rustam often repeated what his father imparted to him, told him the importance of deciding what you wanted to be in this life, in this world. Some people wait for God to decide for them, he said. This isn't how it is supposed to be. No one knows how it is supposed to be, he told his sons. People are betrayed by their own intelligence. The truth is neither here nor there. It will be there one minute and disappear the next. The truth is on the tip of your nose, he told his sons. You can barely see it most of your life, but you look at yourself for long enough and you will see the truth. When that moment comes, snatch it and eat it, and you will come out alive. And their mother felt not like a mother, but a presence that waxed and waned. Not so much human, but a ghost that appeared in rooms, shifted things around from time to time, spoke in a language of a different realm, of a different existence. It only occurred to them that she was corporeal at the time she was being beaten, when she bled. And the sons wondered why, unlike any other animal in the world, why their mother did not defend herself. They believed their mother had stitched moments of repose between their father's blows, communed with the hiss of a kettle and the smell of garlic rising from metal, lost herself in folds of cloth, kept a glass bottle with dirt and weeds near the windowsill. For what reason the sons were never sure. Something like that was hers and would now always be hers. She stared hard at the sun when twilight came, trying to remember her old name, then trying to forget it. The father let the boys wander the forest and the riverside, but prohibited them from talking to any civilized soul who crossed their path. Brothers should be enough for each other, he said, 2 halves of a whole. The boys were tall for their age, their young bodies wiry with sinew and scar, and the brothers sometimes spoke in unison, taking turns as each other's echo, as if they drew some sort of hidden power from each other. They ate together, slept in the same bed, waking at the same time, bladders and circadian rhythms in sync. When one became ill, the other did as well. If their father beat one of them, the other asked to be beaten as well. They were never without each other. Even in dreams, they were together. They developed an interest in animal anatomy, and so agreed to a partnership. Rustam would catch the animals, Rudra would dissect them. Rudra clipped the wings of dead bats, examined them tendon by tendon, showed his brother which muscles relaxed and which as the wing unfolded. He collected eggs of the iguana and fish gills and bird beaks in boxes and jars. And even though the desire was not fully formed, the idea of walking through an endless tissue gallery was this brother's idea of a dreamscape. One day, their father brought home a stack of plywood planks, setting them at the side of the house. He told his sons he did not want them going near the wood, that it was not their property, and more so not his property. Nonetheless, by midday, the brothers disobeyed this order. Rustam had decided to play a game with one of the tinner pieces, holding one of the planks over his head, trying to balance it, and Rudra giggled as the plank tilted and fell off his brother's head. When the plank hit the ground, it exploded. The veneer at the side blew out. The birds on a nearby palm fluttered off. The crack of the explosion shot into the far distance, past the lapping river, past the hushed crunching of the bamboo. For inside that plank was a rifle, and the brothers could only surmise that within the others were rifles as well. When their father came home, he took one of those rifles and set the 2 boys on a long path leading to the forest. He told them, before today, there was 2 roads. You choose one. And now I'm going to set you on that road that you choose. Not walk, run. Because this is the road you decide you want to go down. He aimed the rifle at them and yelled, "Now show me how fast your rabbits could run." He counted to 3 and began firing as they ran. And the boys decided to make a helix as they did, swerving in and out to dodge the bullets. They went cracking with each blast, bullets nicking the earth, clouds of dust and grass sprouting with each one. They ran into the dark of the forest, climbed the tallest tree they could find, and hugged each other and stayed there for the night, being eaten alive by ants and mosquitoes. When they returned home, they had boiled yams and roasted yard fowl for dinner and slept until evening, hiding from their father. 2 months later, a shadow visited the house. One usually believes that a killer would wait until dark, at some strange hour, to do his bidding. But to a shadow, there is no strange hour. Every place is always the wrong place. Every time is always the wrong time. This is what the father had carried in his head since the day he threw his shipmates overboard to the sharks. One's fate can hide on either side of the moon, on either face of the faultless flicker of lamplight. The father had gotten accustomed to sleeping upright at the kitchen table. He knew his death was waiting. He got up, put an unlit cigarette in his mouth, and went outside, leaned against a wall and embraced the silence of the land. He returned to the house where a grass path tapered towards the latrine, and in that moment a thought crossed him. A semblance of identity he had scraped for himself as a child, like a hungry dog at the back of an abandoned abattoir. He was never one to give in to delusions, but in that moment he mused about a different life he could have had, still among men without having to look over his shoulder. At least on this road he now walked, he could have some fun. Even in this darkness, the latrine made a deep trapezoid of shadow on the grass. He pulled the Colt out of his pocket and fired 6 times into the shadow. A loud grunt rumbled out. A body slumped to the side, then fired back. Looked like lightning coming out of the ground. 1 shot connected, 1 grazed. At first the father could not tell where he'd been hit. Just knew that the metal had gone into his body. Felt the frosty shock wave through the nerves. The shadow fled towards the forest. The father gave chase. Wasn't long until he caught up, and only when he held the man down did the father see the blood dripping from his own neck. It fell into the man's cheeks, seeing them red like a circus clown's. He wasn't sure where the bullet had bit, or whether or not it was still in there, and he still wasn't sure where the bullet had entered his own body. Though every time he shifted his weight, a cold pain jostled his left side like vermin trying to chew its way out of the marrow. He and the shadowed man tussled along a flower-strewn path that led to 2 jabilo trees, the spiked bark that monkeys dare not climb. The trunks and branches formed a spiny proscenium. The father picked the man up by the neck and slid his face down the spikes of the bark. An eruption of fruiting capsule blasted from above. The sound of the heavy cracking stirred unseen birds. "Who sent you?" the father grunted. The man squealed 1 word, "Chambo." When the man was dead, the body was left to the insects. The father lit a cigarette, then lit a candle, took it to the latrine, where he sat to inspect the body. A bullet had grazed his neck, and the other had entered the left shoulder. He went back to the house for sewing thread, grooming scissors, and a bottle of whiskey. Down half the bottle and dug the bullet out with the trimmer, before holding the flame to the wound. Stitched it himself. Pain is temporary, he told himself. But vengeance is permanent. It's a permanent cycle. This was one shadow of many that would be sent by Chango. He was smart enough to know that the forest can only swallow so many bones. There was no stopping it. There was no turning back. He decided to follow through on the promise. The next day, he waited until his wife and his sons were asleep. Then until dawn, he sat at his favorite rickety table with a tall bottle of whiskey and a Colt gun, already fitted with its magazine. It wasn't that he had spent those hours pondering the plan, hoping that some spirit, some forest, something from the mall would creep into his head and yammer So he would change his mind. No, he knew what he had to do. He had to start fresh. There had to be a clean break. As the sun came up, the Cascades began their call. And he wasn't going to his preference. He would have paid a wandering carnival to release a stampede of elephants and tigers if he could, because death should be sweaty and loud and calamitous. It shouldn't be this peaceful. That's how death should be, he thought. So he returned to the room and he shot his wife in the head. He owned her life. It was only right to end it now. And then he went into his son's room, and Roger opened his eyes, scooted forward, and kicked the gun out of his father's hand. He hadn't known it was his father. He wasn't even sure that he was awake. He was running on the fuel of a nightmare, still in a reverie populated with shadows and arrhythmia, a wasp trying to sting its way out of his own heart. So the gun fell to the floor and fired a shot parallel to the ground, the bullet skittering like a quicksilver cockroach, slicing off a chunk of the bed leg. Rustam then woke up, the room misty with gun smoke. He rolled to the edge of the room, grabbed the cold metal grip of the gun, and when the smoke cleared, he gazed upon the face of his father, the man's unruly touch of hair glistening as the sunlight leaked through the window like melted butter. And his father hollered at the top of his lungs, "You forget your eyes, your father, or what?" before his son pulled the trigger on him. And he wasn't sure. He actually hit the man until the botany of blood bloomed from his belly. Trembling, the boy dropped the gun. All he could recall at that point was his father picking up a pack of cigarettes from the dresser. The boy took his brother's hand, and they ran into their mother's room only to find her dead, skull blown open like a blooming rose of meninges and brain and bone. They ran to the river and followed the water for what seemed like hours, ran until their limbs burned. The father, having fainted from the gunshot wound, just yards from his home, was arrested for the murder of his wife. When he recovered, they handcuffed him and put him in a cell at the Bell Village police station. The man woke up drooling, cheek down on greasy metal, dried honeycombs of phlegm on the wall behind him. He knew the police would try to kill him right there in the cell. So in the early morning, he pretended to be dead. When the watch guard went to check on him, he strangled him with the chains or the cuffs, took the key, held it between his teeth, and unshackled himself. He grabbed the service revolver and was about to make his way out of the station when another officer shot him in the back, cold. He spun around, cocked the hammer with the heel of his hand, and began firing. 3 bullets in the wall, 1 in the ceiling, 2 in uniforms. Another officer fired back, hit him twice in the cheek. The man died, with a heavy thud and a bright glint in his eyes. And when he hit the ground, his last breath sounded like a light snore. His last thought was the sea pulling him under before everything went dark. Thank you.
Open it up to a Q&A, a brief Q&A. Any questions? I know I have some. Elaine?
Hello. So, the women in this novel go through a lot of violence, oftentimes more than the male characters or because of the male characters. I was wondering what your thought process was, where you had received inspiration for these female characters and so, because they are fairly distinct.
Yeah. So in the setting of the barrack, there were actually decisions that I had to make it not seem as bad. Because I had to have the male residents of the barrack be either infirmed or elderly or children, so that there wouldn't be any rape, because that was a very common thing within the barracks themselves. I didn't see it as so much targeting the woman within the novel. There's ripple effects that come from even characters that don't have a name like the mother here. So for example, the son, Rudra, he doesn't speak throughout the novel. He only speaks towards the end. And his mother doesn't speak either. And we're kind of left to think, is that in a way honoring what he believed his mother was? But there was an immense amount of violence that happened. And I often describe, I think I once described this in a paper, if the Caribbean had a Wild West, this time within Trinidad was like the Wild. There was no justice. There was nothing. There was evil just allowed to run free. And it's only until, as I said, like until this man, who's based off a real man, I read a man named Boise Singh, this character here, who's much worse. That was what I depicted here. He was allowed to live freely among the people, to the point he became a folklore, even though he was a real man. They're like, be careful, boys, this thing will come and kill you in your sleep. That's literally what they used to say. And to me, I wanted to write more about the systems that and the beliefs that will lead to this type of violence, rather than focusing on the violence itself. Because there's violence, I believe, against not just the humans within this book, I said, but against institutions that these humans set up, and even the animals that these humans kept. So it may be interpreted as otherwise, but that was my focus when writing it. Thank you.
Can you elaborate more on like the beliefs that you are addressing? I know that there's a mention of Chango in the passage that you read, and I was wondering if these beliefs are related to like superstitions of these like like non-Christian belief systems, or if you're also seeing these beliefs coming from like Christian faiths, or if it has nothing to do with religion, or kind of like what a little bit more about that background.
I'm going to tell you a small anecdote that I have. So about a half hour from where I live, sometimes I drive down to this area of Trinidad called the Temple in the Sea, and it's the west part of the island, and there's a temple there's a walkway. Of course, it's in the sea, but there's a walkway that goes. But what's notable about it is how that temple got built in the first place. And there's a statue of the guy, but the story is not that well known even in our country. So there's this one of the laborers who came from India wanted to practice Hinduism. Now, you could practice it openly, but you weren't allowed to have the literature on you, the Bhagavad Gita, the whatever readings I had, and then a lot of them couldn't read. Then you weren't allowed to have a man there. There's a Hindu temple. So he said, you know what, I'm going to build one, and then we could congregate, and we could practice our religion here. So he built it. The British broke it down. Built it again. They broke it down. Built it again somewhere else. They broke it down. Built it again. 4 times he built it. They broke it down, and they told him. And each time he was arrested. And they said, you are not allowed to build a temple on our land. Then he said, you know what, I'm going to build it in the sea. So he, over the period of decades, he took this is him by himself, he took a wheelbarrow and he toted boulders, rocks, anything, barrels, so he could make a walkway into the sea. And there are people I know who could attest that, seeing him as just a man toting this thing back and forth. And he built this temple there. And by that time, they couldn't do anything about it. The folks in charge. And people used to congregate there to practice their religion. To me, like, even if you just wanted to just have a place of worship, and that was the extent it had to go to. So that's what I'm talking about. But that's the big headline version of it. Now, if you wanted to go to school, you wanted to get a job working in a government building, you couldn't be Hindu. You had to be Christian. So it was like, we're not forcing you to do it. But if you want to get you want to live this kind of life, you have to convert. So it wasn't like with a gun to the head or anything like that, but it was instead the removal of systems that would be beneficial. But even those who decided to be educated amongst the cows, that's what they call it, not in a school, that's now its own institution now. They form their own schools, their own Hindu schools and so on in Trinidad. So it's a power struggle when it comes to beliefs, to religion, even just people. Thank you.
I love what you said about writing other places and being from Trinidad, and I've heard Adichie talk about that too, about that idea of sort of like writing England and not having ever seen snow. Like, how much do you think that idea of like colonialism kind of still permeates contemporary Caribbean literature, and can we get away from it?
I don't think. I think it's changed a lot since then, and a lot has to do with the Caribbean has now like festivals, literary festivals that help bring writers together. Because a lot of writers, there was this so-called, I guess we would call it the golden age of Caribbean literature, where you had like Selvon, B.S. Naipaul, Jean Rhys, and all of that would have been 50s, 60s, 70s, and then a whole lot of nothing. And when I say nothing, I didn't mean people with writing, but people with connecting with publishers and with connecting with each other. There wasn't this one nexus. But having festivals, having institutions and grants and access, in fact, internet helped a lot. Because the internet helped us connect to agents, helped us connect to publishers. Whereas, because I remember, like as a young adult, I had no idea how I would even do any of this. But it was much easier to communicate with someone via email. Because my agent lives in the UK, and I've only met him a couple of times, and yet we've managed to produce this together. And to coordinate launches and media blitzes and things like that. So, but I do think there are a lot of children who grew up resenting where they come from, because I did. I resented where I came from. And they rebel against where they come from by writing about snow and writing about apples. And it's not like, let's say you're inventing, it's not like Nilo Hopkinson where she's inventing a Jamaican-like fantasy world. They're inventing something very European and Anglo, very anglicized. But I think in time, I think the natural process is that the more that you're exposed, the more you want to be taken as a serious writer. And when I say serious writer, I mean one who wants to take the culture and the language forward, that they have something to say about their own experience of where they come from. I think like those, they would eventually branch out from that. They would connect with one of the groups that we have, and they would learn to love the language. That's actually the first caveat for a lot of us, is learning to love the language, because from primary school, that's like elementary school, we learn to despise, we learn to see it as less and dirty, and so that's usually the first step we have to overcome. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for the reading. I was so struck by the image of the clucking mother, and I wanted maybe to hear from you about that image. And my second part of my question is also about the influence of Harry Samiladu and Pain Like This Body, and this particular story of a family and two sons in particular. Violence. I wonder if you could just talk about his influence as well, if any, on the work.
Yeah, that's going to link right to what I answered there. Sometimes there's this one book, and I don't think that's exaggeration. So sometimes there's really that one book that would change your mind. And that was actually the one you mentioned, No Pain Like This Body, by Harold Sunny Ladu, because I love reading genre literature. So I like reading crime, I like reading horror. I don't like writing, I like reading it. Elements of it ends up in my own writing. I purely like literary fiction, like to write it. But his book, you know, there's so much, we have so much folklore in the Caribbean. That stuff that we have the Lugaru, right? Lagahu, which is like a werewolf. We have the Sukuya, which is like a witch cloaked in fire. We have all these things. And we don't have like horror novels. Like we don't have dumb Twilight-like novels about them, right? People just don't want to write them. And so it's like the easiest thing you could go to. But when I read this book, No Pain Like This Body, I was like, you know, it's not supernatural, but I love like how it was framed. It's framed like a horror because it's from a child's point of view. The people are isolated in a barrack just like this. There's a storm approaching. There's all the horror elements, isolation, everything. The way in which it's written. And I was like, Caribbean literature could be cool. You know, this could be not something I have to study. I mean, people have studied that book, but this is something I could just read it. And I read that in one go. Where there was, you know, the wake, the scorpions, the death, everything like that. Huge influence on me, and you'll find a lot of this, some of this stands on the shoulders of that. And with what's the next one? The clocking model. What do you want to know about it?
Just what it means to you, and like the idea of like the man giving her those words, and the relation to animals as well.
Yeah. So what that means to me is you could almost play it off like there's a lot of these characters that I think of them as being colonized by someone else or colonized by a spirit. So for example, Marley, who's one of the main characters in here, so she could pass for white, and her husband, Dalton Chango, he wants her to act like an English woman. He wants her to be refined and read English literature, and wants her to dress a certain way, and put on this theatrical kind of makeup and act a certain way. To the point that I describe her as the ship of Theseus, which is you fix something, you remove one part, you replace, but when does the ship stop being the original ship? You take out enough parts and replace them until you've lost yourself. And that's why I also think of the wife here, the man's wife, where he has disassembled her. In her language, he has manipulated. And I had a movie in mind. I don't know if you all know this movie, Dogtooth. Anybody knows that movie?
Oh,
It's a very disturbing movie. It's a movie about a father who teaches language to his Dogtooth. It's a Greek film.
Yeah.
Who teaches his children certain words or other words. Like helicopter might mean cat, something like that, but it gets taken to extreme level. And I was thinking that has a way in which, you know, to mess with the language of a person. I was thinking about how language was messed up with me. Not to say that, you know, I went through that. But yeah, there's a mutation that occurs with a lot of these characters. There's one character that almost goes inside of another one and rearranges them. So that's what I had in mind. Thank you.
Time for one more question. Kevin, I wondered if this was brought up a little bit earlier, and I have this question written down because I'm very bad about asking questions without rambling. So I have it here that in the novel there is a great emphasis on living things, right? Not just domestic, right? We see that with the dog, White Lady, who becomes basically a character that evolves throughout the entire novel, but also the environment.
Yeah.
The ravens or the corbeau, right? You have a wonderful shirt on that I hope others appreciate. Insects and worms that are found in the mouths of decomposing bodies. Like there's just a great emphasis on the organic. So I wanted to hear a little bit more on what role do you see these elements taking within the book, right? That they're populating the space beyond just setting, right? How do you see the purpose of the organic within the work and within the larger construct of the novel.
Yeah, the land itself, I when I was writing the book, I was thinking of the land itself as a character that oversees all of these others, but almost like a god, but an unintervening, god. And I knew from when I was writing it, I would end it with the land just being totally uncaring about what is happening there. And I was reading, I like Jack London, and he has a short story called All Gold Canyon. And in that short story, there's a man who he's panning for gold. I can't remember which state, but he's out in this wilderness near this river. He's panning for gold, and he's trying for a very long time to get this gold. And then he gets enough of it, and then suddenly a bandit shows up, and he robs him of the gold. And then they have this huge scuffle where the man kills the bandit. The rest of the story is just this whole scuffle of violence. Then the man kills him, buries him, he kills the bandit, buries him in a shallow grave, and takes the gold home. And the story actually ends with just all the animals, the insects, the grass growing over the grave, as if nothing happened. And you see, and eventually the story ended like, and just another day began, as if what happened was totally inconsequential. And I wanted, when I write, I think of this term like narrative zooming, kind of like a close-up in a movie. You close up on certain things, and you zoom out and you look at everything, like a big Where's Waldo picture. And then you see what really mattered and what didn't matter, and how would the world see this, how would the land see, how would the universe see this. And it's not this fatalistic view of things, but I wanted to show that all of these actions here they would be forgotten. They would be so petty. These divisions that these people have set up for each other that they don't need to have. They don't need to have divisions of religion or race or belief or geographical location. Eventually the grass is just going to grow over all of it. And that's how that's why I wanted to depict to the end with the land, the insects, everything, all of that would be sovereign over all the pettiness that we have with each other. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To purchase right in front, and also he'll be making himself available to sign any books that you may want. So please and thank you for coming, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.